Michelle Walker says that we are constantly ignoring those short problems that can make us to get in big troubles in the future because we think that we are not able to solve that kind of problems. What would happen if there is a really high problem right in front of us? That problem, which everyone talks about, that you know that affects you directly in your life. In this point, we just think we must do something to get the power to fix the things before it gets worse. We are all much more likely than any of us to admit to miss what is right in front of our eyes. And in fact, we are sometimes most likely to turn from things precisely because of the threat that they represent to us. In business, life, in the world, a perfect example that I look from the world is the economy. For example, Alan Greenspan was the head of a reverse in the US. His entire job was to watch out for problems in the US economy and to make sure that they did not spin out of control. So after 2006, when real estate prospects, more and more respected institutions started to sound the alarm about risky lending and dangerous market bubbles. As you know, in 2008, if you research, it all came tumbling down. Banks collapsed, global stock markets lost nearly half of their value, millions and millions of people lost their homes to foreclosure. At the bottom, nearly in 10 American was out of work. So after things calmed down in a little bit, Greenspan, this man, and others, with the help of others, came out with a post-mortem and said, nobody could have predicted the crisis. They call it a black swan, something that was unimaginable, unforeseeable, and completely unprobable, a total surprise. Except it wasn't always such a surprise. So a lot of other people also saw the warning, spoke out publicly, and they were ignored. So they didn't know exactly what the crisis was going to look like, not the exact parameters, but they could all tell that the thing coming at us was a dangerous, visible and predictable as a giant gray rhino charging right at them. The black swan lends itself to the idea that we don't have power to over our futures, and unfortunately, the less control that they think we have, the more likely they are to downplay it or to ignore it entirely. And it dangerous and this dangerous dynamic masks another problem, that most of the problems that they are facing are so probable and obvious they are things that we can see, but we still do not know anything about it. So that is why Michelle Walker created the Great Rhino. That this is a metaphor to meet what she felt was an urgent need, to help us to take a fresh look, and with the same passion that people had for the black swan, but this time for the things that we are highly obvious, highly probable, but still neglected. Those are the gray rhinos. Once you start looking for gray rhinos, you see them in the headlines every day. And so, what I see in the headlines, if they have learned anything in the last 10 years. So, if you listen to Washington or Wall Street, that most of us know about these things, you could almost be forgiven for thinking that only smooth sailing lay ahead. But in China, where they spend a lot of time, the conversation is totally different. The entire economic team, all the way up to the president, talk very specifically and clearly about financial risks uh, as the gray rhinos and how they can uh, they can they can take that time. Now, to be sure, for example, China and the US have very different systems of government. We also know this, which affects the why they are able to do or not. And many of the root causes and for the economic problems are totally different. But it is not secret that both countries have problems with debt, with inequality, with economic productivity. So how come the conversations are so different? You could actually ask this question, not just about countries, but about just about everyone. The auto companies that put safety first and the ones that don't bother to recall their shabby cars until after people die. The grandparents, for example, who in preparing for inevitable, the ones who have the eulogy written, the menu for the funeral lunch, and everything but the final date sheets in the gravestone. But then you have the grandparents on the other side, who don't put their final affairs in order, who don't get rid of all of the junk they have been hoarding for decades and decades, and leave their kids to deal with. So, what makes the difference between one side and the other? Why do some people see things and deal with them, and other ones just look away? So the first one has to do with the culture, society, the people around you. If you think that someone around you is going to help pick you up when you fall, you're much more likely to see around you is going to to see a danger as being smaller, and that allows us to take good chances, not just the bad ones. For example, like risking criticism when you talk about the danger of that nobody wants to talk about, or taking the opportunity that they are kind of scary, so in their own way are gray rhinos. For example, in the US has a very individualist culture, and paradoxically, this makes many Americans much less open to change and taking good risks. In China, by contrast, people that the government is going to keep problems from happening, which might not always be what happens, but people believe it. They believe that they can really rely on their families, so that makes more likely to take certain risks, like buying Beijing real estate, or like being more open about the fact that they need to change direction. And in fact, the pace of the pace of the changes in China is absolutely amazing. Second of all, how much do you know about a situation? How much are you willing to learn? And are you willing to see things even when it's not what you want? So, many of us are unlikely to pay attention to the things that we just want to black out. We don't like them. We pay attention to to what what when we see, what we like, what we agree, and but with the opportunity and the ability to correct those blind spots. Uh, these the people spend a lot of time talking about with people of all walks of life, about this theme in their life and their attitudes. And you might think about the people who are more afraid of risk, who are more sensitive to them, with the ones who would be less open to change. But the opposite is actually true. uh, I have found that the people who are willing to recognize the problems around them and make plans are the ones who are able to tolerate more risk, and deal with the bad risks. It is because as we seek information, we increase our power to do something about the things that we are afraid of. And that brings Michelle Walker, sorry, to this third point. How much control do you feel that you have over the gray rhinos in your life? One of the reasons we don't act as that we often feel too helpless thinking of climate change. It can feel so big that not a single one of us could make the difference. So some people go about life denying it, other people blame everyone except themselves. Like a friend of this person who says that he's not ever going to give up his surf until they stop building coal plants in China. But we have an opportunity to change. We have an opportunity to change. Not two of us are the same. Every single one of us has the opportunity to change our attitudes, our minds, our way of thinking about the life, our own and those people are around us. So in this TED Talk, Michelle Walker wants to invite all of us to join in helping the spark an open and honest conversation with the people around you, around us, about the gray rhinos in in our world, and be brutally honest about how we are dealing with this type of problems. We hear so many times in all the places. Well, of course, we should not deal with obvious problems, but if you don't see what's in front of you, you either dumb or ignorant. No, that's not the way. That's the way they say that, and I personally am not agree with that. This person is not agree with this type of way of thinking. If you don't see what's in front of you, you're not dumb. You're not ignorant. You are human. You're just a person. And once we all recognize that shared vulnerability that gives us the power to open our eyes, to see what's in front of us, and to act before we get trapped.